and girls that are planning on going to children's church to come on up front, please. Just come right up to the center here. Okay, how many of you guys heard what these guys do? They give out Bibles. That's right. How many of you have a Bible? Do any of you not have a Bible? Oh, you all got Bibles. Okay, great. Well, I'm going to ask you then, because they have some Bibles, so I didn't know if you had them or not. But, they do a tremendous work in passing out God's Word to people that may not have God's Word. So can you give them a high five as you head toward Children's Church? Just walk by and give both of those guys a high five for the work they do passing out Scriptures. And if you want another Bible, he'll give you one. But we appreciate the ministry of the Gideons, and again, as was mentioned earlier, we will be taking up a love offering at the end of the service for their ministry. I encourage you to give to it. It's a tremendous ministry, one that's special in the sense that none of the money that you give to the Gideons goes toward any operating expenses or anybody's salary. They pay dues. To be a Gideon, you pay dues, which cover all of those kind of expenses. All of the money that people give to the Gideons goes to the production and distribution of Bibles. So it's a unique and tremendous ministry, and I would encourage you to consider giving to it. Also, I hope you can come back tonight to watch the movie. It's a good movie for people of all ages that deals with some right to life, some sanctity of life issues. With an average of close to 1 million abortions a year, it's no wonder that the topic of the sanctity of life, the right to life, the pro-rights abortion groups are in such conflict, and that there's so much discussion concerning this current issue. In order to help you to become better informed, I'm hoping to briefly cover some of the main aspects that are related to this particular debate, and hopefully cover some of the biblical passages that deal with the sanctity of life issue. I don't have enough time to deal fairly with it. I could make it into multiple sermons, but I trust that many of you are already somewhat abreast of the current debates that are going on within the right to life and the pro-abortion movement, the things that are happening in our culture around us today. So I'm going to sort of just go through this quickly this morning, but hopefully it will still be helpful to you. I say quickly, it went a lot longer than I thought at the first service, but I'll try to go quickly. It's interesting that from about 1900 to 1973, abortion was illegal in the US of A, exactly the opposite of what it is today. But then there came a very important court decision. In Roe versus Wade, the US Supreme Court decided on January 22nd, 1973, or at least that's when they handed down their opinion, that no state in the United States of America may make laws regulating abortion during the first 3 months of pregnancy, except to provide that they be done by licensed physicians. Now you may be thinking, well, who else would do them? Well, right now, Planned Parenthood is lobbying to have nurses and nurse practitioners and physician's assistants and other medically trained people be given the right to do abortions. Currently, under the Roe versus Wade decision, they cannot. But it was the first Supreme Court decision that made abortion completely legal. When I say completely, at least during the first 3 months here in the United States of America. However, it also provided for some state regulations. The laws regulating abortion between the 3rd month and the time of viability are constitutional only insofar as they are aimed at safeguarding the health of mothers. That law, or those laws that relate to the time of viability from somewhere between 6.5 months on until the end of pregnancy, may not prevent abortion if it is to preserve the life of the health of the mother. And so, although most abortions are done during the first trimester and there are no real regulations regarding that. When I say that, you have to go see a physician, and the physician has to decide to do it. But it's pretty much up to the mother for the first trimester. After that, there are different regulations depending on which state you live in, because the Supreme Court decision allowed the states to decide on how to regulate abortion during the second and third trimester. However, it says to preserve the life or health of the mother, and that includes all factors, including physical, emotional, psychological, and family considerations, as well as the woman's age, at least as long as they are relevant to the well-being of the patient. And so a woman could seek an abortion during the second or third trimester to preserve her emotional health. And so a lot of people aren't aware of that. Then on July 1st, 1976, the court extended its original decision to reaffirm that abortions may be performed on minor daughters without the knowledge or consent of their parents. Many of you remember when that decision was made, and many people objected to it, and yet that was the decision of the Supreme Court. It also prohibited fathers from vetoing the decisions of their wives, or it didn't have to be their wife, but from the woman. Men could not veto the woman's decision to obtain an abortion. So that decision is completely up to I say completely, she has the legal right to make that decision, whether the father is in agreement with it or not. And so abortions for the second and third trimester are more regulated than for the first trimester, depending on which state you live in. In September 2000, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration approved various medicines that would cause what we call medicinal abortions. Some people refer to it as the abortion pill, and there were numbers and there are names for those particular medications. But now most of the first trimester abortions are done medicinally. They're done by giving the young lady a pill. The other type of abortion that is done is referred to as a surgical abortion. And so once they pass 10 weeks, the abortion drugs that are used are only to be used during the first 10 weeks. Once the infant is beyond 10 weeks of gestation, then they're supposed to use some form of surgical abortion. Now, what are the statistics in relationship, and this that's a Supreme Court, what are the statistics in relationship to abortion? Well, nearly half of all pregnancies among U.S. women in 2011 were unattended. And about 4 in 10 of these were terminated by abortions. Now, a lot of people say that that's one of the main reasons why people get abortions, is they were unattended and it would interfere with their lifestyle or some other reason. Not because of the health of the mother necessarily. 19% of pregnancies, excluding miscarriages, in 2014 ended in abortion. That's almost 20%, or 1 out of every 5. Or, yeah. Yes. So, yeah. I wasn't real good at math, sorry. Wasn't real good at softball, wasn't real good at math, wasn't real good at... Anyways. Thank you, Barry, for... I just gave myself away. By the way, there's still a lot of really nice people here that used to be here, if you ever want to come back. No, so. No, I'm teasing. Barry goes to a good church. Approximately 926,200 abortions were performed in 2014, almost 1 million. Now that, on the other hand, is down from 1.06 million in 2011. And so the number of abortions are decreasing. In fact, they've been steadily decreasing since 2011. I think that's due to the Christian consensus speaking up. We'll talk about that later. But at the current rates, 1 in 20 women, that is 5%, will have had an abortion by the age of 20. About 1 in 5, or 19%, by the age of 30, and about 1 in 4, which is 24%, by the age of 45. So abortion is becoming quite common, and many women in our culture today have had abortions. And so this makes it also a very personal issue. And if it is a personal issue for you, I hope that you will at least hear me out to the end. I'm not here to pass judgment or to condemn you in any way, but to inform you and to help you to understand what the Scriptures say in relationship to this particular topic. Now, to understand abortion and the current dilemma that our country is in, I think it's helpful to understand a little bit about the history, but I'm going to try to go fast through this, or it'll take me a long time to finish this message. Abortion, infanticide, and euthanasia have been practiced in various cultures for almost as long as mankind has existed. It is not a new problem. In fact, the ancient Spartans, I used to read about the Spartans a lot in my history of Western civilization class. We had to pick a people group to study, and that was one of my favorite people groups. I enjoyed learning about their culture. But the ancient Spartans, when they would give birth, when their women would give birth, would take that baby out and lay it on a rock somewhere or put it somewhere out in the countryside and abandon it for 3 days. And then they would come back and check on the health of the baby. If the baby was still healthy, then they considered it fit enough to be a Spartan. If it wasn't, they left it there to die. Can you imagine doing that today? And yet that was common practice in that particular Greek culture. But not only did it happen back in the days of the Spartans, it's happened in many different cultures over many different periods of times, even up until the American Indians, which practiced a form of passive euthanasia. Infanticide, the killing of babies from birth to 1 year old, was common in human sacrifice, which was one of the earliest recorded forms of infanticide. Archaeological evidence indicates that prehistoric children, this was a secular article, so it calls them prehistoric children were sacrificed to the gods. In Germany, a mass burial grave dating back to 20,000 BCE was discovered containing 33 skulls of children who appeared to be the victims of sacrifice. Aztec children were sacrificed to the rain god Tlaloc. The Sangero tribe of eastern Africa sacrificed firstborn sons to assure a bountiful harvest. As late as 1843, not that long ago, children were sealed in walls, foundations of buildings, and bridges to strengthen the structure. There was a superstitious belief that somehow that would appease the anger of any gods, or that it would ensure that the bridge would last. Don't ask me where all the logic came from. Evidence of this practice dates back all the way to the walls of Jericho. Historically, birth was not necessarily viewed as a transition to life. In fact, common law in England presumed that a child was born dead. According to early Jewish law, an infant was not deemed viable until it was 30 days old. During the 1950s, the chief rabbi of Israel, Ben Zion Uziel, said that if an infant who was not yet 30 days old was killed, the killer could not be executed because the infant's life was still in doubt. In Japan, a child was not considered to be a human being until it released its first cry, a sign that the spirit entered its body. Scientists and ethicists continue to disagree about when life begins, fueling the moral debate surrounding abortion and infanticide. The 21st century moral philosopher Michael Tolley contends that neonates are not persons, and as such, neonaticide should not be classified as murder. Tooley has suggested that infanticide should be allowed during a brief 30-day period after birth. So what we think of as being barbaric and out of date and old-fashioned and something that couldn't happen in our culture today is being proposed by some people even in our modern era. Until the 4th century, in fact, infanticide was neither illegal nor immoral. Complete parental control of the father over the life of his child was dictated by both early Greek and Roman laws. Patria potestas refers to the power of the Roman father to decide the fate of his child, even before birth. However, if a mother killed her child, she would be punished by death. Dads had complete power over whether the child lived or died. Legal sanctions against infanticide were introduced in the 4th century as Christianity infused secular laws. The Roman Emperor Constantine, a Christian convert, proclaimed the slaying of a child by the child's father to be a crime. Infanticide was punishable by death penalty by the death penalty by the end of the 4th century. Around the same time, the Christian Emperor Valentinian declared that it was illegal for parents to fail to provide for their offspring. Thus, by the Middle Ages, infanticide was no longer condoned by either church or state in Europe. However, as a result of hard times and high illegitimacy rate, infanticide was the most common crime in Western Europe from the Middle Ages to the end of the 18th century. And it is that same logic that is still used today to justify abortion, that it causes undue hardship on the mother. And she shouldn't be chained to the home while the father is free to go. I actually read a quote like that. The woman should not be chained to the home, unable to pursue her dreams and her goals while the father is able to go off and get more education or get a better job. And so chained to the home. So therefore, let's kill the child. Now, they're not talking about doing it with children that are already born. They're talking about doing it with children that are unborn. And so the issue of viability and the issue of sanctity of life come into play. The unsaved don't really consider the idea of the sanctity of life, I think, to the extent that Christians and religious people do, but it certainly comes into play in relationship to this debate. Planned Parenthood was formed by a woman named Margaret Sanger, who had a desire actually to see birth control become widely available to women to prevent abortion. Did you know that? Today we think of Planned Parenthood as being the organization that performs, which it does, the most abortions in our country, and the organization that promotes the most abortions in our country, which it does. But it originally started out to promote birth control so that women wouldn't become pregnant, because in those days they were performing, this was after the Comstock laws, which if you're not familiar with the Comstock laws, in 1873 there was a law passed that prohibited the distribution of obscene materials. Sometimes they're referred to as anti-obscenity laws, obscene materials through the U.S. mail. Birth control discussions and information were considered obscene. My, how things have changed, huh? Now your 6th, 7th, and 8th graders are learning about birth control and how to use birth control in schools. But at one time it was considered obscene material and thus regulated by these laws. In fact, not only were you not allowed to send it or receive it through the mail, you were not allowed to distribute it. And Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood, which wasn't originally called Planned Parenthood, she founded other organizations to try to help make birth control available to poor people. But then today the organization sees abortion as simply another method of birth control. Because of the changing views on abortions, it's considered more acceptable. But Margaret Sanger wasn't personally opposed to abortion on religious or moral grounds. She was opposed to it because she saw it as unsafe and unhealthy. And in those days it was, because most abortions were performed either by the mother herself, self-inducing an abortion, or by people who were poorly trained medically. And so oftentimes she, as a nurse, would go to the home of a poor person in the area where she was working and would find a woman. In fact, she relays this story in one of the pieces of literature that I read about how a doctor called her to assist him in the health of this particular woman who had performed a self-induced abortion and was in very poor health because of it. And she went there and she wanted to make available to this woman information about birth control, which the doctor denied. The doctor denied it under the Comstock laws in the belief that it was obscene in that day and age. And so she wasn't able to share with this particular woman. The woman later on, months later, became pregnant again, performed a second abortion. Margaret Sanger was called to this lady's home again the second time, unable to save the lady, and she died. And that's part of what fueled her and her efforts to make birth control widely available and to make people aware of birth control. Now, I'm not holding her up as some sort of a Christian idol or person we ought to look up to, because she actually looked down on Christianity, because she saw Christianity as the reason for the Comstock law, which to a large part it was. Christian leaders and Christian people saw discussions concerning sex and birth control and things of that nature as obscene. Now, can you imagine if some of those people that lived under those laws were alive today? Where you can pick up your cell phone and watch pornography. You can turn on any computer and watch pornography. You can turn on the cable station and watch pornography. I mean, full-blown pornography, right? That's one of the problems that we're having in schools today, is confiscating. We have to confiscate kids' cell phones because they're catching kids going to pornographic sites on their cell phones. And of course, the internet is the same thing. We have to monitor our computer lab so that we can make sure that kids aren't going to pornographic sites. My, how things have changed. And in some ways, I wish we had those anti-obscenity laws, but I do disagree with those laws in relationship to birth control. I don't believe, but they did in that day, they saw birth control as interfering with God's divine plan for the family. Now, I suppose, depending on your mindset and your reasoning, it could be that the desire to use birth control could be simply a selfish desire. But I don't have the same opinion that they had in those days of that. But that's what led up to Margaret Sanger forming Planned Parenthood. So actually, we would be in agreement in part with some of her reasoning for the formation of Planned Parenthood, but I'm in total disagreement with what Planned Parenthood promotes today in relationship to abortion, that is. But why should we be so concerned about it? Why is abortion wrong? Why should we view it as wrong? And some may say, well, because it's life. You're taking life. Well, how many of you have been hunting? How many guys go hunting? Raise your hand. Okay, how many of you have ever killed an animal? Women, maybe you don't go, but maybe you killed the neighbor's cat and never told anybody. No, okay, you won't confess to that. How many of you have killed a cockroach? Okay, they're living creatures, right? They're living creatures. So now, how many of you stay up at night regretting what you did? In relationship to cockroaches, anybody? No, okay, nobody. Squirrels? Anybody here ever kill a squirrel and stay up late at night and no? Okay. I used to go squirrel hunting all the time. Now, I did kill a bird. The first animal I killed, other than insects, was a bird. I shot a bird with a BB gun, and I remember walking up to it, and I did it for no good reason. My dad always taught us if you're going to kill something, you ought to eat it. And I didn't want to eat that bird. So I just sort of watched it die as the blood pumped out of its head, and I remember thinking, ugh. And I did feel bad about that because I killed it for no good reason. I just wanted to see if I could hit it. Hey, there's a moving target. It was walking slowly, and pew, got it. Okay. But, I don't stay up at night and think about all the squirrels that we killed as young people when we went squirrel hunting. It doesn't bother me. And yet that's life. So what is the difference? What is the difference between, well, you say, well, it's human life. Well, if evolution is true, then what's the big deal? You're just a highly evolved squirrel. Right? You took a different path. Right? Somewhere in the past, we all had the same ancestor, and they diverged. So really, there is no sacredness or specialness to us if we are simply the products of evolution. And that really sort of, I think, fuels part of today's debate, is a lot of people have bought into the theory of evolution, and they don't see any sacredness or sanctity of life. In fact, while science can help to determine viability, it cannot determine sanctity. And viability is one of the issues that came into play in the Supreme Court decision, because what the Supreme Court, basically the logic goes like this. If it's viable outside of the womb, even if it requires technology, if it's viable outside of the womb, then it may be due protection under the U.S. Constitution, which protects the rights of U.S. citizens. If it's viable outside of the womb. If it's not viable outside of the womb, then it may not be afforded the rights or the protection of the U.S. Constitution, because it's really not human yet, if it's not viable outside of the womb. Therefore, it's a part of the mother. Therefore, it falls under the right to privacy issue, and the mother has the right to do with her body what she wants to do with her body, because they don't basically see it as a human life at that point. But the problem is it a human life? Just because they don't see it as one, is it? And is it sacred or special? Does it deserve special treatment? And the only place really to find that out is through the Scriptures. Science, like I said before, can determine viability, and now we know that viability occurs at an earlier age than they did in 1973 when the Supreme Court decision was made. But they weren't that far off. I think they said about 24 weeks, and today we know there are children that have been born at 21 weeks of age and have lived. Now, they need technology to live. But you know what? Some old people need technology. Anybody in here have a pacemaker that helps keep you alive? Right? How many have had surgeries? Technology has all, in one sense or another, helped us to be alive. How many of you are on medication? You need daily medication, and if you didn't take it, it might result in your death. Anybody in here need? Wow. Oh, I got a lot of people. I'm buying pharmacy stock. No. So, isn't that a result of technology? We've discovered what drugs can help people. We've reduced or synthesized or created some of these medicines that we take. And then there are other people in the later stages of life. Sometimes you've been involved with this, maybe, that are on some form of life support. And we still believe, though, that person is a living being, and that they're special, they're sacred. There's some sanctity to their life, and they're different than animals. Science can't determine that. Science can only determine whether it's viable or not. And so today, with the modern technology, we can sort of look inside of the womb, and you can see in some of these pictures that even at early stages of life, here at 8 weeks, You can make out the head, the eyes, the arms, the legs, the abdomen. The structures are all there. A little bit later, 12 weeks. This is the first trimester. Women can still, during this period of time, obtain legal divorces for almost no reason at all. And you can look at this, and I had some little models, and I took them out in between. I forgot them in the first service. I took them out for the second service, and I set them down somewhere. There they are. I'm gonna ask, would you help give one to the back row, one to the middle row, and one to the front row on each side? There's 6 of them, and you guys just pass those around. These are supposed to be fairly accurate representations of a developing fetus or baby inside of a mother that's reached 12 weeks of gestation. And so when you look at these, you can see the detail. And then just pass it to somebody by you. And I would like them back. We use them with our teen group to show our teens and others. So if I can get those back at the end of the service. But you can see in the overhead that quite a few of the details of that baby are there. The thumb, the fingers, the nose, the lips, the eyelids, everything's pretty much there. 16 weeks, even more detail. In fact, here you can even see the veins showing through the skin of this baby. It's human. It looks just like a human. It's got a heartbeat. It's got brain waves. It's got a respiratory system. It's not able at this stage of the game to survive on its own because the lungs are simply underdeveloped. Yet all the organs are there. All the organs are there, and they're all functioning to one degree or another. Look at 20 weeks. And you can see the lips, the nose, the eyelids, etc. And again, at this stage, a woman can still obtain an abortion in the United States if the doctor deems that it is necessary for the health of the mother, and that includes emotional health. 24 weeks old, so just a little over half of the pregnancy period. And look at the detail in the face of this picture of this 24-week-old baby. I mean, it's even smiling, having happy dreams, I guess. What does a baby dream of? They've never had any experiences in life. Do they dream? I don't know. So where do we go to decide then, since science cannot determine sanctity but only viability, where do we go to determine sanctity? Well, we can go to the culture. We can ask people around us, but then you'll get all differing opinions, and depending on what culture you're in, it'll differ from culture to culture and from time to time, from age to age. For example, the anti-obscenity laws today, a lot of people, even Christians, would say, those were a little too strict. And so issues of life, you'd get the same result. So culture is not a good place to go. You can go to religious dogma. The problem with religious dogma, and by that I mean simply the tenets of a particular religion, they differ. Even within Christianity, are you aware of the fact that there are Christian groups that are okay with abortion, with the current laws regarding abortion? That they see them as fine. There are current Christian groups, I could name 2 mainline Protestant denominations, some of which maybe some of you have attended or grown up in or have friends that attend, that condone, not condemn, but condone abortion as it currently stands. So even in Christianity you can. So where do we go? If we can't go simply to the culture or science or religious dogma, there's only one place to go, directly to the Scriptures. Directly to the Scriptures. If you believe in divine inspiration of the Scriptures, which I believe in, we've talked about that before and why we believe in that. There are good, solid reasons why we believe in biblical inspiration. It is God's Word. It is the place to go to for the answers to life. And so I'm going to turn to the Scriptures now. Many of you are familiar with some of these passages, and so I'm going to go through them quickly. But first of all, we see in Genesis chapter 1, verse 27, that it says that God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him, male and female he created him. It is only mankind that is said to be created in the image of God. No animal is ever said to be created in the image of God. Now, animals are living beings, but they're never said to be created in the image of God. And there is never any penalty attached to the killing of an animal until the millennial period. I'll add that. And there's a whole different reason for that. But the Bible actually said after the flood, to Noah, God said, go and kill and eat freely of anything that creeps upon the earth. Any animal. He could eat lizards, he could eat snakes. At that time, they could eat pigs. Pork wasn't outlawed, right, at that particular point in time, not until the Mosaic law came along later. They could eat anything. They could kill and freely eat of it. But they could not kill human beings. There was a very severe penalty attached to killing human beings. Genesis chapter 9, verse 6. And that penalty is rooted in the fact that man is created in the image of God. After the flood, after the fall, it says, whosoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. For in the image of God has God made man. And so there is something special about us being made in the image of God. We are different than animals. We are not simply highly evolved animals. I know you hear that a lot in almost every nature program that's on TV and in almost every magazine that you pick up, but we are not simply highly evolved animals, although scientists may classify us as animals. We are unique from the animal kingdom. No animal ever stays up at night and worries about his retirement, or whether to pull out of the market while it's still really good. Should I leave it in for another 6 months? You know, it's going pretty good under Trump. Does your dog do that? Does it come up for financial advice? No. Do gorillas and monkeys? You can look at the smartest of creatures on planet Earth outside of humanity, and none of them have near the mental capacity that man has. And they lack creativity, and they have a certain amount of it, but they don't have the same amount. And original thought and the ability to construct and to build. They can use primitive tools by this sort of Pavlov's type of experiment where they find out that a stick will reach something, and they use the stick over and over, but they never turn that stick into something that's got a squeezer on the end and picks up something without them having to bend over. Do they? And then market it, because they can make a lot of money that way. They don't design elaborate homes and build them in condominiums and develop, cultures with government and laws and rule. There is such a gap between anything in the animal world and man. And even if there wasn't that gap, the fact that God created us in his image, let's say that there was some creature that was closer to mankind and almost as intelligent, almost as creative, almost as smart, it still wouldn't mean that it had a sacredness or a sanctity to it, because the Bible says that it's only true of man that man was created in the image of God. A part of that, I think, it has to do with the fact that we are eternal beings, that we have a soul. And God breathed into man the breath of life, and man became a living soul. Our souls will live forever. I don't believe, that's never said of animals. I'm sorry. If you want your horse in heaven with you, just keep thinking that it'll be there. There will be horses in heaven, so yours may be replaced by one that's already there. But as far as animal, you don't have to worry about whether your animal goes to heaven or hell. Okay? They don't have eternal souls. They have feelings. They have emotions. We ought to treat them kindly. The Proverbs say that. And when you hear me joke about somebody killing the neighbor's cat or something, it's just a joke. Bad sense of humor. You know me long enough now that I don't have a great sense of humor. It's warped. Been around too many people from Grace Bible Church that have influenced me over the years now. But not only are there the passages that teach that man is created in the image of God, and therefore there is sacredness to human life, there is sanctity to human life, but we also see that God is intimately involved in the formation of human beings, even while they're in the womb. And this is what causes me to believe that the baby, all through its gestation period, is a human being. Because I never see God treating it as anything different. God always treats, whether you want to call it a blastocyst or a zygote or a fetus or an embryo, and by that you dehumanize it, and it makes it more palatable to people to believe in abortion. But no matter what you call it, the Bible treats it as a human being and nothing different. Right from the very beginning. Psalm 139, this passage is one of them, verses 13 and following. For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. God is knitting. God is involved in how our chromosomes come together and which ones link up and cause us to be the unique individual that we are. You knit me together in my mother's womb. Now, maybe some chemical messengers play a role in that, but God created those chemical messengers. But I still think there's a divine hand in each and every human being. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place, when I was woven together in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. God not only is intimately involved in the formation of babies in the mother's womb, and therefore they're considered human beings by all accounts, as far as I can tell, but he also has a plan for them. And their days have been planned before they're ever even born. You don't plan things. God doesn't plan a future for things that aren't humans. You know what I'm saying? God treats the baby that's developing inside of the womb as a human being. He refers to it in that way. Job chapter 31, verse 15. Did not he who made me in the womb make them? Did not the same one form us both within our mothers? Jeremiah chapter 1, verse 5. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you as a prophet. Did you know God knew your vocation before you were born? And if you're in the will of God at this point in time, you're in the vocation that God wanted you to be in. That's amazing. But all of our days were planned in advance. Again, it indicates that God refers to and thinks of the developing baby as fully human. Now, what biblical passage then do people use to try to justify abortion? Because as I mentioned earlier, there are sects, even of Christianity, that believe that abortion is okay. Most of them base it on one passage, one particular. Now, they may refer to some other things in the Bible, but this is the key passage that most pro-abortion Christian groups use. Are you ready for this? Exodus 21, verses 22 through 25. It says, if men who are fighting hit a pregnant woman and she gives birth prematurely, but there is no serious injury, the offender must be fined whatever the woman's husband demands and the court allows. But if there is serious injury, you are to take life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, bruise for bruise. Now, some people look at this passage, and what they say is, you'll note that if there is a woman who is injured because there's a fight going on, so maybe she comes to the aid of her husband, he's a little wimpy, the other guy's beating up on him, and so she steps in. You imagine that, your wife's got to step in to help you. Maybe he was outnumbered. Anyways, so the wife steps in, and she's pregnant no less. She steps in to help out her husband. She gets hit, and it causes an abortion. Right? In the King James, I think it says, at least in the Hebrew, it literally says, and her fruit departs. But here it says in the NIV, and she gives birth prematurely, but there's no serious injury. The offender must be fined. Aha, see there? There's a artificially caused abortion, caused by somebody hitting her, and the baby is expelled, and there's only a fine. That's it. No death penalty. Well, I'd like to suggest they're reading that wrong, that they're interpreting that wrong. It doesn't say that the baby's born dead, does it? Look at the text again. If you look at it, nowhere does it say the baby is born dead. In fact, it says, but if there is no serious injury. And that said, it doesn't distinguish between the mother or the child. And as I mentioned before, in the Hebrew, it literally says, and her fruit departs. It doesn't say die. It says depart. In other words, the baby comes out of her. But then it goes on and it says, but if there is serious injury, and notice again, it does not distinguish between the mother and the child. So to try to say that this passage applies to the mother in one place and the child in another is to read into the passage something that isn't there. It actually says if there is serious injury, you are to take life for life. If the baby dies, the man dies. If the wife dies, the man dies that caused the death. Eye for eye. If her eye gets poked out or if the baby's eye get poked out. Tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, bruise for bruise. If this verse proves anything, it proves that the baby is considered fully human. That it had the same rights as the mother had. The same right to the same protection with the same penalties for a violation of that baby in some form or fashion. Some sort of harm done to it. And so all through the Bible, we see that man is created in the image of God. There's a specialness, there's a sacredness, there's a sanctity to human life. We see that God is intimately involved in the formation of human beings in the mother's womb. Exactly how, we don't know how. But it says that he is, and he treats it, as he talks about the baby developing in the mother's womb, he treats it as a human being. He refers to it as a human being. He talks about plans for it, as a human being would have plans. And then we find this passage, which says if there's no serious injury, then there's just a fine. That fine would apply to the mother or the baby. But if there is serious injury, then that would apply to the mother and the baby as well. And so the baby is treated the same as the mother. So if that is true, then that means if God really sees the developing baby as a human being, then that means every time there is an abortion, there is a murder committed. That's why this debate is such a hot topic. And I have to go along, despite my feelings or despite what I want or desire, I have to go along with what God's Word says. And sometimes we are faced with very difficult decisions. I know that. And I know that some mothers in the pinch, in the crisis of a particular situation, have made a decision that they really didn't want to make. And we're not here to condemn those mothers. We're not here to look down on them. We're not here to somehow make their sin the unpardonable sin. Even murder is not the unpardonable sin. Remember the Apostle Paul, before he was the Apostle Paul, was Saul of Tarsus, and he killed Christians. Was he forgiven? Yes, he was forgiven. Now, he said he did it in ignorance, but a lot of women receive an abortion, oftentimes in ignorance. That's why I want to encourage you to become involved in pro-life activities. In fact, when we ask the question, what can I do? One of the first things that you can do, even before being involved in pro-life activities, is be involved in evangelism, discipleship, and the defeat of selfishness. Because I think for the most part, the reason why, not everybody, but the reason why most people get an abortion is for selfish reasons. I want to continue my education. You say, but that sounds like a good reason. Is it good enough to kill a baby? I want to continue my education. I want to get a better job. I want to make more money. I don't want to be confined to home. I got too many kids as it is. Boy, another kid. You know what? You know what's happened to me and we wish we would have had more kids at times. Now, when we had 3, we used to say, well, that's enough. But now we think, yeah, I wish I would have had more. I've hardly ever met a parent that regrets having a lot of children. My mother had 5 of us, and her mother had 13. And, they all love their kids for the most part. But today we have other pursuits and other goals and other ambitions, and we think that a child will simply interfere with that. It reminds me of what Ephesians says. But it says that as for you, you were dead in your transgressions and sins in which you used to live when you followed the ways of the world and the ruler of the kingdom of the air, the spirit who is now at work in those who are disobedient. All of us who lived among them at one time, gratifying the cravings of our sinful nature and following its desires and thoughts. We may not have been aware of the fact, but in our unsaved days, many of us did exactly what Satan wanted us to do, including pursuing various lusts. And whether it was the lust for sex, which is basically what people, they want to have sex without the repercussions of having sex. They want to have sex without having the consequences of having sex. Right? And so if they didn't use birth control, they don't want to quit having sex. Instead, they want to eliminate the consequences. Or even if they did use birth control and became pregnant while using birth control, they want to eliminate the consequences. And really, I think for the most part, that boils down to selfishness. James 4, verse 2 says, you want something, but you don't get it. You kill and you covet. We oftentimes apply that to the rich and the powerful who lust after something else, something in this world, and maybe do things that actually result in the killing or the murder of other people to get it. But isn't the same principle sort of true with those, oftentimes maybe, who get abortions? Again, oftentimes it's done out of ignorance. Oftentimes it's done in an unsafe condition. Sometimes it is Christians who do it for one reason or another. Christians are not beyond selfishness. And so that's why I say be involved in the process of evangelism, discipleship, and overcoming selfishness. All of us are selfish to one degree or another. We all need to overcome selfishness. Be involved in pro-life education. Promote life. Educate yourself and others. Have literature available. Write editorials in the newspaper. Some of you have a lot of time and you think, what can I do for the Lord? Write editorials to these liberals that write all sorts of gobbledygook that is nonsense sometimes in the newspaper. I've written a few of my own over time, but it takes time to do that and have it well thought out and to do the research and make sure it's well documented. Write editorials. We need more people that do that in response to some of the stuff that you read in some of the editorials. But also have literature for people maybe that are relatives, nieces and nephews. You know, oftentimes it's the guy who's pushing the girl to get an abortion. My mom volunteers at the Pregnancy Crisis Center in Newport Richey, the West Pasco Pregnancy Center, and Eleanor Huddle volunteers there. Eleanor's not here today. My mom was at the early service. We need more ladies there. They'll train you They want more volunteers. If you want to be involved in saving lives, there you go. Now, I'd like to see some younger ladies get involved with it. It'd be nice to have some younger ladies who the young ladies, when they come in that are of childbearing age, might be able to identify better with. Even though everyone seems to love my mom. You know, she's got that grandmother type of personality, but it'd be nice to have a few young faces in those places trying to work for the Lord and promote life. Create a climate of grace. What else can we do? Create a climate of grace. What do I mean by that? We need to offer forgiveness to people who have done things wrong, no matter what it is. We need to be known as a people who are willing to forgive, rather than to look down our noses on people. All of us have done something that the Scriptures condemn. Maybe you haven't committed something as offensive as an abortion, but maybe it's been more offensive, or maybe it's been multiple things that are less offensive, but we've all done something wrong. And we're to forgive as what? As Christ forgave us. How did Christ forgive us? Totally. Totally. And so we need to create a climate of grace. Be willing to listen. Be willing to offer help. Be willing to forgive. I already mentioned volunteer and pro-life causes, and then finally, legislation. Be involved in legislation. The good news is, I think that because Christians have become more aware and more informed on this particular topic and more active in opposing abortion, rules have changed. Rules have changed. On April 18th, 2007, the U.S. Supreme Court in a 5-4 decision upheld a law passed by Congress and signed by President Bush in 2003 banning partial birth abortions. That was because people like you called your legislatures and wrote them and emailed them. And so now they're banned, despite the fact that Planned Parenthood is actively lobbying to have it done away with so that they can do partial birth abortions again. In 2000, a total of 13 states had at least 4 types of major abortion restrictions, and so were considered hostile to abortion rights. But by 2016, this category included 27 states. The proportion of U.S. women of reproductive age living in hostile states rose from 31% to 57% during the same time period. Now, while that sounds bad, because this is from a secular source, and saying hostile restrictions, they're bad, we're saying, amen, right? More restrictions makes waiting periods so that women don't do it on the spur of a moment, on a decision that they might regret. Other types of restrictions. And why is that? Because Christians and others have spoken up. The abortion rate in 2014 was 14.6 abortions per 1,000 women aged 15 to 44. That's down 14% from 16.9 per 1,000 women in 2011. This is the lowest rate ever observed in the United States since 1973. What you're doing matters. It's making a difference. Keep making a difference. I mentioned one of the ways we can be involved in making a difference and being involved is through evangelism, discipleship, and overcoming selfishness. Well, we have the opportunity to help evangelism right now without doing anything more than pulling out your wallets. And there is a tremendous ministry represented here this morning. And while I want to encourage you to be involved in personal evangelism on your own, to your neighbors, to the people you work with, or you go to school with, your friends, I also want to encourage you to be involved in organizations that also do evangelism. The Gideons do that. You heard they're going to be on the University of South Florida's campus here the end of this month. How many of you have ever gone to the University of South Florida and handed out Bibles? They're going to reach people that, Henry Miller. Henry Miller is one of our Gideons. Do we have any other Gideons here this morning? Anyone else? Go ahead and stand up. Let me just see. I think I see Jim Mass and Henry Miller, I know. Okay, both of those guys are. So, is Luke still? I think he was at the early service. Okay, thank you, Henry. Today we have the opportunity to take up a love offering and give to that. If you'd like to do that, that's a way of distributing Bibles to people where they can read these verses. And more importantly, where they can read about the Lord Jesus Christ and hopefully come to know Him as Savior. When that happens, our whole mindset changes, doesn't it? The way we think changes. And so I want to encourage you this morning, if you have the ability to give, to do that now, and to help out this tremendous ministry, but also be involved in evangelism outside of just giving as well. And so as our men come forward, and as we prepare to take up a love offering for the Gideons, let's